It is impossible to buy a cheap used car for a ridiculously low amount of money and have that thing be reliable and not ridiculously expensive to look after, maintain, and all that other kind of stuff. At least that is the main comment I have received across the many list videos I've done about cheap used cars over the past 3 to 4 years. Now, I obviously don't agree with that statement at all, but I wanted to find out if there's any truth behind it by looking at my 3 very cheap used cars that I have bought over my lifetime. And that's not including my donor MX-5, by the way. So I have bought 3 different cars since starting to learn to drive, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about how much each of them cost me in terms of maintenance and repairs over the time that I owned them. Things that went wrong, basically. And I'd love to know in the comments down below if you guys have had any different experiences with cheap used cars. Oh, and if you're new here, remember to hit subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, do hit like. It really helps me and the video out. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the video. So starting with my first car, which was a Skoda Fabia Estate, 1.2 litre classic as it was known at the time. I got that car on eBay off of a builder who had taken it as part payment for £400. Incredibly cheap. I think it was about 64,000 miles on it when I bought it, which is not bad at all for that kind of money. It was 50 different shades of green, but we can ignore that. And if you want to hear more about it, there's a video that I made all about that car just here. So yes, 400 quid on my first car. Now what went wrong with it? Well, the first thing to note is definitely coil packs. 3 of them went in my time of owning that car. That was about 25 quid per unit, so about £75 in total to repair. My dad fixed the first one. I think I fixed the other 2, so yeah, very easy fix to do. Didn't require me to pay for a mechanic. All good. Helps as well that my dad is a car mechanic, by the way. Should preface this whole video with that, by the way. Dad's a car mechanic, so life becomes a little bit easier. But that was still doable myself, just for reference. One thing that I fixed that was a quality of life upgrade, literally just a few weeks before the car ended up dead for good, was the door locking mechanism. The passenger door ended up getting locked completely shut. It just wouldn't open. I had to do many different types of like voodoo nonsense to try and get the door to open, and it just wouldn't go. So in the end I got a new door mechanism. It cost me 20 quid. One thing that we just couldn't diagnose for ages was the car was losing a bunch of power. It was just like, it felt like the car was getting strangled as I was driving it, is the way that it felt at the time. What it was a catalytic converter had packed up and actually started to, I don't really know how to describe it, but it was throttling the exhaust fume. So exhaust wasn't actually coming out the exhaust, it was getting stuck in the cat. Now I didn't actually spend this money, but I'm still going to include it in the total because a new cat would cost about £105 on one of these Skodas. We didn't spend that money. Instead, we just fixed it. And the final one that had any money attached to it was my exhaust cracking, which cost me about 30 quid to replace the entire exhaust from another second-hand Skoda. Outside of that, there was wear and tear, but I didn't really do anything to solve the wear and tear. The car was just old and I just drove it as it was until we had the brake failure, which by the way came as a result of a whole situation. If you want to hear more about that, I did make a video on it a long time ago. Either way, the brakes failed, the whole car died, all that money down the drain, gone regardless. So I never sold the car or anything. I never got any money back from the car. That money was just sunk into it. So to recap, that was £400 on the car, £230 on repairs, so all in that car cost me £630, not including like maintenance and that kind of stuff, but maintenance was still ridiculously low, like not even worth mentioning low. End of life, the oil consumption was a bit bad, so I used to maybe redo the oil like almost every single month, I guess is the best way of putting it, but again that would cost me like an additional £30–40 over what I would have probably been spending on the car anyway, so I'm just going to ignore that cost for now. On to the second car, a car that you'll probably know if you've been watching the channel for a long time. It's my VW Polo, the car that replaced the Skoda, and it has been generally pretty good throughout its lifespan, until maybe a little bit recently, but even then, pretty good. What's up, cat? Hey? What's up? Hey? What's going on? What's up? You're not involved in the video? Come here. Oh. My cat is disappointed with the fact that I've decided to give you guys my attention rather than him. So, apologies. That's just the way it is. So yes, the Polo, bought for £400, same as the Skoda. And the main thing, same with the Skoda that's gone wrong, is the coil packs. Obviously I had to replace 2 of them over the time that I've owned the car, about 50 quid to replace. We also had that massive head gasket failure scare back a couple of years ago now. Now that was difficult, but in the end, it was just a situation of draining the oil and putting in new oil into the car, etc. All good, 20 quid. I've actually had 2 exhaust break on this car. I had an exhaust on there, it rusted through, cost me 30 quid to fix. Got another exhaust on there, obviously, all good. That one rusted through, got that one off, another 30 quid to fix, 60 quid on exhausts. Similar again to the Skoda, Skoda, the door lock is pretty sketchy. Now I haven't fixed it and I don't need to because it's not locking in the same way as that one. It's doing the opposite. When I try to unlock the car, it all unlocks nicely, all good. When I try to lock the car, the passenger door doesn't always lock. So I could fix that. It would cost me 20 quid to fix. I'm not going to do it, but I'll include the 20 quid in this video just because it's easy. I did some wear and tear fixing the car, but I'm going to ignore those because wear and tear kind of just comes with the territory. I didn't need to do them. It was stuff like the gear boot, etc. Again, it cost me like 5 quid. So if you want to add 5 quid, then do, but I'm not going to bother for this video. One that I am going to mention though is fixing the blowers. So I fixed the blowers a long time ago, made a video about it. At the time they were only working on 4. They wouldn't work on 1, 2 or 3, so I couldn't mediate the amount of blowing. It was just all or nothing. And that cost me £7 to fix. I did it on my own in about half an hour. And then obviously I mentioned wear and tear, but outside of that, nothing major had happened until very recently when the big end went in the car. I made a video about this. The big end went, whole engine needed replacing. Cost 200 quid to fully put it all back in and whatever, no big deal. And I'm pushing it at 200 quid by the way, because the engine came out for free. Like, my dad just had a Skoda that he lifted the engine out of and chucked it into this car, so no big deal. But I'll say 200 quid because we'll just say that's how much the engine cost. They range from about sort of like 60 quid to like 300 quid depending on how good they are, etc. This one is actually on about 77,000 miles, which is not too bad, so we'll just put it at 200 quid. So all in, the car cost £400. In repairs, it was £357 if we include that £200 on the engine. That brings to a grand total of £757 thus far over owning that car for how many years? Wow, nearly 5 years. I've nearly had that car for 5 years. In fact, I've had the car for 5 years. Wow. After 5 years of owning that car, those are my problems. I spent £757 on repairs. And for reference, I had the Skoda for 3 years, so annually it's been cheaper to have the Polo. And finally, my 1997 Mazda MX-5, a car that I bought all the way back in 2019 now for just £1,000. Bought it on eBay because you guys told me I should buy it over an Audi TT. And the moment I bought it and drove it home, I realized there was one pretty major problem with it, which was that the suspension was completely busted on the rear. It was doing no damping. It was springs. They were springing great, but they weren't doing any damping. So the car was incredibly dangerous to drive. So we sorted that out. It could have fixed that for next to nothing on MX-5 parts or whatever. Instead, went for a nice set of suspension. So I'd include that cost. We spent about 600 quid on suspension. Could have been more, could have been less. 600 quid is what I spent. We had to do a lot of rust proofing on the car and sorting out of old rust as well. Cost about £60 in total between my dad and I, no big deal. And obviously we modified the car pretty heavily, but if we ignore the modifications because they were just for fun, they weren't required, I'm just gonna stick to the things that were actually relevant to the car itself. The roof when I got the car was split in a couple of places, so I replaced that, cost me about 300 quid. It has actually split again, and I cannot be asked to fix it again right now because the roof is really nice and fresh, but the rear window has just completely snapped and there's not a zip to let it in and out and whatever, so I need to work out what I do with that. Really annoying. And unfortunately my warranty doesn't cover the window, which is a bit annoying because that's the only bit that's gonna freaking break. You will have seen recently that I snapped that rail that sits between the transmission and the rear diff, so that snapped. I welded it back together, so no cost there. Drove it some more, it snapped again on track, not great. Gonna put another one in. Gonna cost me absolutely nothing because I've got the spare donor card to take it out of, all good. However, at the same time, I'm going to include the cost of it because if I'm going to take it out of the donor car and I want to get rid of the donor car at some point, it's going to cost me 40 quid to replace that specific part of the car. So that one there is another £40 added onto the tally. And then this one is probably the most annoying. For some reason, I really can't understand why my light relay doesn't work. So one of the LA10 relays in the car keeps frying itself and I'm not sure why. That relay is very important, particularly in times like this when it's getting darker around, because it manages my rear lights. So there's a set of relays in the MX-5 that manage the lights, the horn, that kind of stuff. The rear lights one keeps on stopping working, and it's happened to me multiple times. I'm out on the motorway driving home, and then suddenly I realized that like my dashboard lights have disappeared, and that means, I now know, I didn't know at the time, but that actually means that my rear lights no longer work. And that's happened about, yeah, so that's happened about 5 times in the last 2 years, which is actually quite frequent. Luckily, I've got a shed load of those relays because I bought a bunch of them online. Spent about 30 quid to get 5 of them to fix so far. So yeah, no big deal. The car is fixable. It's cost me another 30 quid to sort out. A bit annoying when it happens. And also like if I haven't got a spare relay in the car, I need to disconnect something else. Like I've disconnected my horn to reconnect the rear lights because they are more important when you're driving on an unlit motorway, for example, than being able to beep at people. So that comes to £1,030 on repairs. I'm adding the suspension as repairs. £1,000 for the car, so £2,030 in total. So all in on those 3 different cars, with every problem they've had over the years and that kind of stuff, even the problems they had when I first got the cars, I have spent, and including purchasing cost of the cars, £3,417. That is to own 3 different cars and repair them over the course of the last 8 years. It's approximately £417 and 12 pence per year that I have spent on these cars, including purchasing. If we just talk about repairs, that's £1,617 over the last 8 years in repairs. Per year, that is £202 and 13 pence. I have spent £202 and 13 pence on fixing my cars every year for the last 8 years. That is, I'll take that. That is chill. For reference, that means I have run 3 cars for less than a tenth of the cost of the Alfa Romeo 4C I'm trying to buy. For 8 years. Mad. So you'll have to forgive me if sometimes when I see comments on my videos saying, oh, it's so much maintenance and repairs and blah, 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 they can be very relevant. There are cars that you could buy that are going to absolutely violate your wallet longer term. Will they violate your wallet as much as buying a new car, fronting the depreciation for that car as well, and then dealing with stuff like ongoing warranties, etc.? I don't know. You'd have to spend a lot of money in repairs to catch up to how much it would cost you to just buy the new car instead. Now, there's obviously an argument around practicality and ease of ownership and all that kind of stuff. So yes, of course, I understand those things, but don't always assume that buying a cheap car means you're gonna have to spend a shed load of money to keep it going. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is this in line with how much you've spent when you've bought yourself a cheap car? If so, let me know in the comments down below. If not, then let me know as well. If you've bought a cheap car and it's cost you an absolute fortune to keep it running, then please, again, let me know in the comments down below and I'd be more than happy to hear it. As I said, if you're new here, do hit subscribe and like the video as well. All that great stuff really helps me out. But just because you now know about how I've managed to keep these cars running for the last 8 years, you don't yet know how I've managed to insure them for such a cheap amount year on year. So if you want to hear about how to do that, then click up here. And if you're new here, do hit subscribe. Make 2 videos every single week. It's right down here.